Welcome to this edition of Leading Through Uncertainty. I'm Joanna Kraft, the head of Odgers' Canadian Leadership Advisory Practice. And I'm joined by Eric Beaudan, the co-head of our Global Leadership Advisory Practice. Leading Through Uncertainty is part of Odgers' ongoing efforts to explore how senior leaders are responding to complexity, change, and opportunity in today's world. Eric, before we dive in, when you hear the phrase leading through uncertainty, what does that mean to you personally?
It's a good question, Joanna. Leading through uncertainty, in my view, is really an understatement, in fact, for what many leaders and organizations are going through today. I mean, we're faced with rapid change. The scale and the pace of change that we're experiencing today is much greater than what any leaders or organizations have experienced in the past 20, 50 years. So, leading through uncertainty is really about making sure you monitor your environment and you remain forward looking as a leader. But you also have to think about all the changes that are taking place quite simultaneously around you and make sure that you can still move your organization forward.
And what do you feel are the main strategic challenges that Canadian and US companies are facing given this increased demand of leading through this type of complexity that they may have never faced before?
Well, I think there are three tectonic plates of change or complexity that are clashing together, which makes that uncertainty what it is today. Firstly, we see geopolitical challenges on a scale that we haven't seen before. There's an entire rewiring of the world's economy and alliances that is taking place, whether it's China and the role it's playing in manufacturing or energy supplies, or the wars in Ukraine and now the Middle East. We've had a real wave of geopolitical change. The US just announced that they're going to have a defense budget in 2026 of 1.5 trillion US dollars. That's trillion with a T. And that's larger than the GDP of countries like Turkey or the Netherlands. So these geopolitical changes are massive and impactful, not just for countries anymore, but for organizations and leaders who work in those global environments. The second tectonic plate is around technology, and everybody has heard about AI and agentic AI and what that means for us today. About 25% of the tasks that people complete in organizations today in the US and Canada can be completed through AI, or they can be replaced or already have been. But by 2029, there's going to be something called general uh, artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is going to be a time when artificial intelligence will actually be smarter than the human brain. So that's only 3 years out where we're going to have AI that can actually make decisions, perhaps, and see through things faster than we can process it as humans. So that's going to be the next stage of evolution with technology, which is going to further challenge organization leaders in terms of what does the AI do and what does the human do. So that technological strategic imperative is only going to increase over the next 3 years and beyond. The third strategic imperative is around the demographic shifts that we're experiencing across organizations today around the world, but also very much in North America, where the baby boomers have exited the workplace. We have the Gen X generation, which I belong to, which is still here, but very quickly we're being overtaken by the millennials, who make up 35% of the working population, and Gen Zs, which is coming rapidly up to speed and is going to make up, with the millennials, about 75% of the working population. So that's a big shift in expectations, how they view the workplace. Their attitudes to, for instance, returning to the office are quite different from Gen X or the generations that came before. So I think leaders and organizations have been thinking about these challenges, but it's the fact that they have to address all three at the same time that makes life as a leader today very complicated as you're leading through uncertainty.
Right. And they need to address all those challenges while still delivering, while still meeting the metrics and the targets that they have. And I expect these big challenges are going to create even more demands on leadership within these organizations and really reshape the role of CEO and senior leaders. What do you think is required for these leaders to be successful in thriving through uncertainty given these strategic challenges?
Well, that's a great question. So we know that, for instance, CEO turnover in the US is at a 20-year high, same in Canada. So it's not an easy time to step into these senior leader roles, not just CEOs, but any C-suite role. And I think there are really two skill sets that are going to be critical in addition to all the other capabilities that we know exist out there for leaders to be effective. I think the first one is going to be what I would call global situational awareness, which is what allows you to really digest all these geopolitical shifts and be aware of what's going on in your industry, in your marketplace, around the world. So I think leaders today, they can't afford to just be passive in terms of receiving information. They have to actively monitor that airspace around them and be aware of all the factors that are impacting the organization's performance, their talent, their execution capabilities, their supply chains. So that situational awareness is going to be a critical skill set that leaders need to gain and sharpen over time. And the second one I would call out is around maybe something I would call emotional resilience. So, as a leader, you need to be resilient. You need to be able to ride that wave. You need to be able to make the emotional connection with your employees, with your external stakeholders. And you need to be able to sit in that space that we call leading through uncertainty and be comfortable and bring the organization with you out of that space. So the sense of resilience, the ability to be uncomfortable with that space, and still have the ability as a leader to chart a vision and move forward is going to be critical.
Right. So we're almost expecting leaders to manage a lot more, to be aware of a lot more, to have a lot more that they're bringing in terms of the landscape of what's going to impact their business, but also do it in a way that is emotionally attuned and they can kind of keep the calmness that is required of a leader within an organization.
Absolutely, they need to do that. And I would say, if you're going to be an effective leader in this environment, you really have to think about three different capabilities that allow you to operate.
Hmm.
The first one I would call out is having a learning mindset, right? So you need to be open as a leader to all these changes. And sure, with AI is a good example.
Hmm.
You have to be able to know what agentic AI is, and the fact that your customers or your employees, your suppliers are using those systems and those capabilities, and they're doing so at scale. So
Right.
having a learning mindset as a leader, we didn't think maybe 20 years ago, leaders
Hmm.
had to learn COBOL, and they didn't. But
Right.
today they have to learn something about AI, and so
Yeah.
do boards and many of the senior leaders in organizations.
Yeah.
So that learning mindset is going to be really important to future success for leaders.
Yeah, especially with the importance of an AI-enabled environment. What do you think are some of the other things that leaders need to be really positioned to focus on in this new AI world?
Well, a second thing is to be able to communicate and to listen. Leaders have always been active communicators. I talked earlier about the gap between how CEOs and senior leaders perceive are going to be the benefits of AI and how employees feel today about AI, because AI has been positioned as somewhat of a negative force that's going to replace jobs around the world. So there's resentment that's building up in organizations. So leaders need to be able to not just to communicate their vision,
Mhm.
but to listen to the feedback from their employees and around them beyond their organization to be able to create a more positive view of what the future is going to be.
So there's an ability for leaders to really captivate their employees to help create the solutions and the innovations of the future. And ultimately, they will be the leaders of the future as well. And I know a big part of planning for the future is planning for future leadership, planning for succession. When you think about the challenges that we've talked
Right.
about to date, how has succession become such a critical focus for boards and CEOs?
Well, I think succession's always been critical, especially over the past 10 to 20 years. But now we're in a place where, because of that generational shift that we talked about, succession is happening a lot quicker and before people are ready. So 20 years ago or 10 years ago, we might have had a succession plan for someone to be a CEO or a senior leader in an organization. And that person would have a development plan for 3 or 4 years with an opportunity to experience different roles and get exposure to the board. Today, you might find that that person has 6 months, not 3 years. So it's going to need succession. Is going to need to really accelerate people's development. And sometimes somebody's going to come into a role, and that's what the statistics tell us, is that the new generation of leaders is stepping into their roles 10 years before the prior generation. So if you can imagine, 10 years is a lot of experience that's missing. It's a big
Hmm.
gap. So leaders stepping into these roles, whether it's a CEO role or a senior role, are going to have to accelerate their development, which is why, among other things, executive coaching is becoming such a popular technique for developing leaders, because they need to develop in the job. And that support is becoming more critical.
So part of leading through uncertainty is succession planning at a greater pace than it ever was before and needing to accelerate that. What have you seen are some of the innovative approaches that some of your clients have taken to create stronger leadership pipelines?
Well, there's a lot that organizations are doing these days. I think, Joanna, it's probably every second client call I have and that our team has in Canada and the US is about developing a leadership pipeline and developing the talent across the organization. So I think there's some interesting things that companies are doing. Microsoft has a program underway that I find is really intriguing, that seeks to build the culture blocks for the future leaders of the organization, and have actually made culture a KPI that they measure with their leaders. So they have to get engaged in developing their talent and in building the culture that they need, which I think is an interesting approach to thinking about
Mhm.
leadership development. We have clients, one in Portugal, for instance, that has created a phantom board. So they've invited junior leaders from their organization to sit at their actual board meeting,
Mm.
and after the board meeting takes place, those junior leaders have their own conversations and come to their own conclusions and make recommendations to the board. So they don't have decision making powers, but
Mhm.
they're part of the dialogue, and they
Right.
sit at a board to understand how a board operates at that senior level. And then the third example I would give is from airports in North America that we do a lot of work with. And they actually send their leaders to other organizations, maybe what I might call a boomerang leadership development strategy, where they take a leader from Toronto Pearson and they send that person to Calgary because there's a bigger job available at the Calgary airport, or somebody from the Los Angeles airport that goes to LaGuardia for 2 years or 3 years of development in a very different environment. And then those leaders go back to their organization, and they've learned by sitting in a different environment and learning the ecosystem that they all belong to, which is the aviation ecosystem. So I think we're going to see more of those innovative leadership development strategies, where you're not just developing leaders inside your organization, but you're involving your entire ecosystem and sharing leadership capacity, especially as AI does a lot more of the automation in those industries around the world. Exactly, because it's exposure to new things, to new situations, different contexts that really develops leaders. So I think to push them outside of their environment is going to be very smart for these leaders of the future, as they really need to accelerate their learning and development.
And how is Odgers helping clients find or develop leaders who can thrive in uncertain conditions?
Well, we're doing a lot of what I would call stress testing of the organization's succession plans. And one thing that we have been doing a lot lately with clients is helping them create success profiles, for instance, where we're not just looking at a particular role, but how that role needs to be framed in a strategic context, and what those leaders need to do in order to position the organization for success. So, success profiles, succession plans that can be implemented quickly, and helping those leaders through an assessment, for instance, that might simulate a scenario where they have to make really quick decisions without all the information. So those are things that are helping organizations prepare for this uncertain future. And the second piece that our clients are asking for is around helping teams. And we'll talk about teams of teams as well, but helping their teams become more effective and build the level of trust and collaboration between teams, not just inside a team, but between that team and other teams in the organization.
Why has leadership shifted from individual capability to team effectiveness? And tell us more about teams of teams and how leaders can create a true team of teams.
This is such a great, fascinating topic that is recently come to light, and we would do a lot of work with Dr. Peter Hawkins, who wrote this book on team of teams. And I think the reason this is becoming more topical is because leaders cannot do it on their own anymore. All the thinking and all the doing and getting the results has to be done through teams, and not just internal teams, but external teams in a larger ecosystem. So this team of teams approach is about working the connections between different teams. Because if you think about it, the failure points in organizations or systems are rarely within the team or the individuals in those teams, but they're often between the teams themselves.
Mm.
So, understanding the different connections between those teams in the organization and with their larger ecosystem or environment is where we do a lot of that work, and where organizations need to focus, because you need to be able to have a strategy for addressing connections between the teams, where if something doesn't happen, the workflow gets stressed.
When we talk about teams, boards, although they might not see themselves as a team, are a bit of a unique type of team. I'm curious if this shift from thinking about individuals to teams is translating in how boards view themselves and how they can be most effective.
I think boards have to relearn, in a sense, how they add value to the organization, because boards are usually these days very good about their fiduciary responsibilities or how they go about governance. They have committees that are set up and that monitor. They have the audit committee of the board, the HRCC. So they're usually pretty well structured. And those committees usually understand what they need to produce and how they support the CEO and the executive team. But remember, the CEO and the executive team, they're the ones responsible for making the results happen in the organization. So I think the boards need to really elevate their perspective and help the CEO and the organization see what's coming around the curve, because those tectonic plates that we talked about, they're out there moving every day. So I think the board needs to be taking that role more seriously, become more agile and focused on those larger strategic challenges and how they're going to impact the organization.
Given all that we've discussed today, if you had to sum it up, what would you say are some of the key messages for today's leaders and boards?
I think, Joanna, the key message I would share is that shift happens.
Mhm.
The world has shifted, and leaders have to shift their perspective, their mindset, and their leadership capabilities. And I'll share a bit of a story because I love history, the famous story of Ulysses and his ship and his crew after the Trojan War. So I think we're all part of that journey today. I think leaders need to think about being in that journey, just like the Odyssey, where you're stepping into the unknown. And Ulysses had a 10-year journey that took him around the Mediterranean, and he met some cyclops and sorceresses and all sorts of things that impounded his crew. That's the story that I think we're all embarked on today as leaders. We all need to think of ourselves as a bit of a Ulysses with our team and our organization, trying to get home wherever that is and trying to set a course, knowing that around the curve, there are some challenges and uncertainties that we can't predict. It might be a cyclops or it might be something else, but we need to be ready to face those challenges. We're going to need new tools, new ways of thinking. We're going to need to incorporate AI and all these other innovations. So I think the message is be ready for those challenges, for that uncertainty, be comfortable with it, and learn to move forward and to adjust and learn. I think those are some of the key themes that I see leaders needing to pay attention to as they lead through uncertainty.
Right. Navigate the water's ahead of you, but know that you need to keep moving.
Well said. Well
Yeah.
said, Joanna.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for the conversation and for your insights. I have no doubt that those watching and listening will have learned something new or will have something to pay more attention to as they navigate their own ships forward.
Thank you.